If you are looking for a speaker for your organization, look no further than Dr. Janice Fortman, an international speaker, award-winning author, and producer and host of Relationship Matters TV. What sets her apart is that she connects the heart of relationships with the power of communication and leadership. Dr. Jan's goal is not simply to inspire audiences for a moment, but to give them the insight and tools to transform the way they live, lead, and relate to others. Contact her at drjan@drjanisspeaks.com or 1-877-667-7325.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is Dr. Jan Fortman with Relationship Matters TV. I hope all is doing fine. We are here right outside of Chicago, and we are very close. We're about maybe 10 minutes away from the Indiana border. And we are suffering with these strong storms and tornadoes. We've forgotten that in Indiana, they had lost a lot of power, especially in one of the cities that's close to us. And we were going to get something to eat. And I have never, ever seen such devastation. You see it on TV. But when you see it live and you see these huge trees and they were uprooted, it's just like, oh my God, I'll never, ever forget that. And we're still due for some more storms right now here, right outside of Chicago. It was raining. Yesterday, we had a severe storm watch. I don't know what's happening, but we hope that this is over, and we really pray for people who are really, really suffering, who lost, some of them just lost everything. So keep them in your prayers. Well, I want to talk about my guest that I am having today. Her name is, and I love her name, Ulli. Her name is Ulli Hildebrand. She is a highly accomplished professional and consultant, and she brings over 18 years of experience to the world of human resources and leadership. And I need this. I need to talk with her. I want to really listen to her, because I've been placed in a leadership role at my church and working with human resources, and we have a problem. So anyway, she is most passionate about helping future and current leaders to become the best that they can be in their leadership role, and to enable them to grow their organization, the people in it, and themselves. So now, If you are a leader, you've been thrust into a position like I have been. Today, you're going to get some tools on how to identify those hidden leadership gaps, avoid those common hiring pitfalls, which we didn't do, and implement practical strategies that improve team performance and organizational health. So, in other words, don't do like we did. Don't just fill positions, build a leadership powerhouse. And she's going to show us that it is easier than you think. But before I bring her on, we're going to tell you a little bit more about her in a video story. Well, I would like to introduce to you Ulli Hildebrand. Hello, Ulli.
Hi, Dr. Janice. Very nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for being my guest. And you are right on time. Because, as I was saying, in my church, I am in a leadership role, but recently I have had to work with human resources. And everything that you talked about, we should have done, we didn't do. and we are in a quandary. We are really in a quandary. So let me start here. You are from Germany, correct?
I am.
Okay. And you received a master's degree in economics from a university in Germany, and I could not pronounce it, so I didn't want to mangle it. So what was the name of the university?
It was Karl von Ossietzky Universität, and it's located in Oldenburg in Lower Saxony. That's northern Germany.
Okay. All righty. Okay. You did it a whole lot better than me. So let me ask you, first thing I want to know. You were the first foreign national to serve as HR director at Mercedes-Benz in the USA. So what was that experience like? And what early lessons about leadership and cultural bridging shaped you today?
That is a really good question. And I'm glad you asked this, because this is something that I think some people may find interesting, or maybe not necessarily the right thing to do. So when I was promoted to HR director for Mercedes-Benz USA, I had been in the country for about 2 years, but not working in HR. So I really had not a whole lot of idea about HR here in the United States. I had some background in Germany, but I didn't know anything about labor law, certainly nothing about benefits. And I really kept thinking, how complicated can you make it, But the interesting lesson that I learned in that situation was that because I didn't know, I had to rely on my people. So I had a really great team. They've been there a long time. They were, a lot of experience. And they would come to me because I was the new boss, and they would come to me and says, well, what do you want to do about this? And I would have very little idea. So I would just say, well, what would you do? And when they came with a proposal, I said, well, if it sounded if it made sense to me at all, I would say, let's do it. And if it went well, they got the credit. And if it went sideways, I took the blame. So really what I learned, and you asked about the lesson, I think the biggest lesson that I learned during that time was sometimes, and in some situations or some positions, the less of an expert you are, the better leader you can be. Because I had to rely on my people. I had to empower them, because I couldn't tell any different. That was one piece. And the other thing was, because I really didn't have the local expertise, I couldn't make up for any low performance. So if there was a performance issue, I had to address it very quickly, because otherwise we would have been in trouble.
Oh, wow. And we're in that situation now, trying to address something, and we have not done it quickly enough. And like I said, we're in a kind of quandary, I should say. So one thing, when I was reading your bio and all about you, one thing that you said was that as leaders, sometimes we keep promoting high performers into leadership roles, and they might really not want to be a leader, or might even not just be prepared. So why do you think organizations do this? And so often, and what are the costs to the different teams and inside organizations when you do this? You see someone, they're really good at what they do, they're high performers, so let's make them a director over this department, and they don't really want to, and they're not prepared. Why do we do that?
I think often the process goes like this. A position becomes vacant. Let's just say a manager quits, the position is vacant. So now the company posts the position. They may post it internally, nobody applies. Then they post it externally. They go through a whole long recruiting process, and it takes sometimes months. They see several candidates, but they don't like them 100%, so they're hesitant. And at some point, the pressure in the organization becomes so big to do something that the organization reverts back into itself and says, well, don't we have anybody who can do it? And then they're looking at high performers, people who have worked hard, maybe people who've been there a long time, and they say, well, so-and-so can do it. And then they approach the individual, and the individual is, first of all, probably, feels appreciated and complimented. Depending on where they are in their stage of their career, they might say, well, it's definitely more money, so let's take it. So they say yes, but they haven't really had a chance to really think about what leadership actually means. Nor does the organization really check, is that person the best person for a leadership role. Wanting it is one thing, but also being able to do it, being motivated to do it, and have the ability to let things go. There are people that do very well as an individual contributor. They like their job, they like their structure, they know what they're responsible for, that's what they can do, that's what they want to do. And now all of a sudden, as they are propelled into a leadership role, there are people coming to them, and they have problems, they have questions, and they're like, why am I answering all this? What am I supposed to be doing about it? So I think there's pressure, when a job has been open too long. I also think there's a general mindset that high performance is the equivalent to potential, which it's not, so, or it doesn't have to be, let me put it this way. And the other piece to it is the employee side. When you get approached, we would like to promote you to a managerial level. That so often in so many organizations is the only path for a career. Yeah. So if they want to be promoted, which is, somewhat inherent in our human nature, when you think about how we're socialized, we start school, and every year if we do well, we get promoted, so that's how we're socialized. So we want to advance, and we want to grow. And then at that point, when the company asks the question, it's hard to say no, especially especially if you're earlier in your career, you want to grow your salary, you want to grow as a person, but there are very often too little opportunities to grow, on a lateral move, or do other things. The normal path in most organizations is usually up.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but okay. So, what happens when, and that was the second part of my question, when that person is really not prepared? And I'm saying this because a friend of mine's daughter, they approached her for a promotion to a leadership position because she is a very high performer, but she felt that she wasn't capable, to be in a leadership position. So she turned that down. But she was told that if another leadership position was offered and she turned it down, that would be a negative impact on her. And so what happens? Well, in the end, she had to take the next one. Very uncomfortable with it. So what does that do not only to her or to that employee, but also to the people who she's leading, the team that she's leading? What are the impacts of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're propelled into a leadership position and you really don't want it, or you don't know what to do, which happens unfortunately more often than not, because once the company makes a decision to promote someone internally, they wash their hands off, they've done their job, the position is filled, they walk away. And now the individual comes to work, and all of a sudden, what they used to do is no longer what they're supposed to be doing. So they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle situations, questions. They may not have the connections. If they have nobody to guide them a little bit through the organization and how to do certain things, and trial and error can be expensive, in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of frustration. So for the individual, it's a very uncomfortable situation, especially if they feel they're not equipped. Because then they become hesitant in making decisions, they can't really give direction. Now, and all of that has an impact on the team, because the team now says, well, why am I talking to her or him if he or she can't help me? She doesn't know what to say. And then all of a sudden it becomes a negative, it becomes the team against the boss, which is from a cultural perspective, really not very effective or productive or helpful in any way, shape, or form. And eventually the team will find other people they can go to, so they will start circumventing the boss they have, potentially undermining whatever decision he or she made. And in the longer term, you will likely have team members that feel so frustrated that they decide to leave, whether it's the team or the organization, but then that creates more turnover. And, now you have the next issue. So it's all in all, it's just not a good thing for an organization to put someone in a leadership role who isn't willing and who isn't ready.
Okay, so Maxine Walker had a question. Did the individual have any training? From what I understand, she didn't have any training to be a leader. She was very good at what she was doing. She was in her department. She was the highest performer, and they just felt that that she would just make a good leader. They needed somebody in the role, and they just felt she did, but she really wasn't. And Rhonda Thomas asked a question. She said, why isn't HR responsible for training the individuals?
Well, I think in most organizations, HR is at least held accountable for training the individuals, but training requires time, training requires budget. And, in most of the organizations that I've been in, we're very short on budget when it comes to individual training. But when it comes to promoting to leadership, I think I would hope that organizations would be willing to train on leadership if they recognize that it's really an issue and not automatically assume that everybody can be a leader. Think about it this way. If you're a straight A student, that doesn't make you a good teacher. And if you are the greatest quarterback, that doesn't make you a wonderful football coach. So and I think people grasp that conceptually, but when it comes to the workplace, there's an assumption that if someone performs at a very high level, they can move to the next level and be there effective. And when you move into a leadership role, it just becomes a completely different ball game. And the particular training for leadership is often really kept to a minimum, so it'll tell you about what's our performance management process. Now you have to fill out these performance appraisals once a year. You have to, I don't know, once a quarter you have to present whatever your plan is. So they tell you some of the techniques. They may give you some communication training, but that's where it already stops. Usually there's no how to handle a conflict. There's no how to navigate the politics. There's no how do you deal with setbacks? Do you even understand what it means for you personally when you take responsibility for a team? And all of a sudden, leadership, now you're in the sandwich position, right? You have your team that comes from underneath that wants something, and you try to help them, but you have restrictions from the top that says, well, you can't do this, or you don't have budget, or whatever it is. And now you can't really help them. You want to, but you can't. And then when the team doesn't deliver, you get your head chopped off because it's your team. So now HR, I want to talk about that because this is something that's really near and dear to my heart.
Okay.
The HR function is not the function that is responsible for everybody's happiness or success. HR is a business function, just like anything else, and they can help design process, they can manage process, it's their responsibility to make sure that policies are in place and that they're adhered to. And so at a higher level, they have a responsibility that people are treated the way they should be treated and get what they need to be successful at work. But on a day-to-day basis, when you think about someone who is in finance, the HR person can't train that individual on finance stuff because they're not the expert. That has to come through the functional department, through the leader. Of course, you can send them away to some leadership training or to some financial training. And HR can be helpful in finding that training, but they can't really conduct it. I don't know if I was answering that question, but HR is the place that everybody points to when something goes sideways with people, and it maybe it's certainly an established way of doing it. But when you're sitting in the HR chair, and I remember that, when I was responsible for manufacturing like 13 facilities across three countries here, and people would ask me, what about this guy who sits 3,000 miles away? I'm like, I don't know him. Like, how would I know, what helps him and what he needs? And, so it's there's a lot of leadership responsibility, I believe, that is delegated to HR. And HR can always only fix the symptom.
Okay. Well, Rhonda said, mentoring or coaching for that person. What's the next question? You answered that. You answered that. Great. And I'm listening to you. And in a lot of small businesses, HR is responsible not only for policy, they're also responsible for training. And then in our situation, like you say, they're not responsible for that person's happiness, but our HR is in a position of someone that's been there for a long time and has got, made personal relationships, but can no longer really fulfill the responsibilities. And so now here's HR that's in that position, and it's a new HR person. So the person who previously trained the person is not there anymore. So now here's the new HR person, and they're not only responsible for the policies and making sure that the employees is adhering to the policy, but now it's like, now I'm also responsible to make a decision about, letting that person go. And I think in a lot of small businesses, especially, they are put in that position. But a text came here, and okay, what are the characteristics of a good leader?
So in my mind, a characteristic of a good leader are the first thing is know what leadership means and really want it. It's like becoming a parent, so I think you have to be kind of clear what you're heading into, and you need to want to make sure that you want to help other people be successful. So I think for a good leader, there's a good chunk of humbleness. I think you have to understand that without the team, you're nothing. I think for a good leader needs to be able to trust, because you can only develop people when you trust them that they can learn, and you need to be able to have them make mistakes and work with them to fix those, but also do better next time. There's listening is important, because when you're in a leadership role, it's about them more so than it is about you. Having the backbone and the integrity to stand for your team, when they mess up, it's you on the line, and you have to be okay with that. So you can't pass on the blame. You have to fight for them, because you're, again, on the assumption that they want to do well. And I think maybe that's the very first mindset. I think you have to come to work thinking that when somebody messes up, they didn't wake up that morning wanting to mess up. They really try, they're trying, they're doing the best they can. Now, are there employees who have limitations? Absolutely. But then you have to decide, can you live with that? Can you work with that? And if you can't, then maybe this is not the right job for the individual, and then you'll do them a favor to give them another opportunity. That's also important. So if integrity is key, you have to be able to listen and to communicate. I think you have to be very, very clear about what your expectations are, because only if you're clear on your expectations and if you're then very consistent, can your people actually learn to act on their own. So in other words, if you're giving out a rule that says, we're answering every request within, I'm just going to say 24 hours, and the first person who doesn't do it gets away with it, then somebody else will also say, well, I don't need to do it in 24 hours, right? If you are very clear in a direction, talking as an HR leader, that nobody in the organization can make a promotional decision without HR involvement. So in other words, there can't be any leader out there who's just saying, well, I'm going to promote, because HR is the keeper of the whole workforce planning. And if there's only one managerial position, somebody else can't just go and promote someone else into a position that doesn't exist. So if that's your your guidance, then you need to be consistent. So your people, when they talk to their clients in the organization and a manager asks them, hey, I want to promote this person, then they're going to have to be able to say, sorry, but you can't do that unless there is an actual position. And they need to know that you back them up as the leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to the person. So from what I've been reading, leadership is burnout is rising. So what are some of the early warning signs that should leaders and organizations watch for, and how can they prevent burnout? Because I'm burnout.
Burnout is obviously a symptom in many jobs. I don't think it's just limited to leadership. I also think that it's very individual. Some people reach that sooner than others. But having said that, to me, one of the most important things to help with burnout is to never take yourself all that seriously that you think the company doesn't function without you. When you take that whole burden on yourself, that you need to be available at all times, you need to answer within 30 minutes, the whole business will shut down when you're not there. I think that is a stress factor that incredibly enhances the chance for burnout. Me coming from a different country, I have a very different philosophy. I believe people need to go on vacation and they need to be on vacation. They shouldn't be checking emails and they shouldn't be available on the phone. Because again, if they win the lottery and they decide to walk tomorrow, the company still has to function. So the goal in my mind, and for me personally, has always been make sure that my team can handle whatever needs to be handled without me, right? Because how important can I be when you think about it? So, and if we have time, I'd love to tell a story real quick about that. In my one of my jobs that I joined, the company in January, and in the summer of the same year, I took 2 consecutive weeks of vacation. And so one of my people was saying, well, you can't do that. And I'm like, why wouldn't I be able to do that? And the answer was, well, you haven't been here long enough. And I'm like, I don't know what that has to do with anything. But the way I look at it, the company has functioned without me for 75 years until 6 months ago. I would think they can do without me for 2 weeks. So, and then my guy asked, should we call you if the plant burns down? And I said, no. I said, call the fire department. If the plant is burning, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to be 4,000 miles away. There's nothing I can do. And it was really funny. I mean, in hindsight, it's funny. In the moment, though, I think people were quite appalled. When I left that company 6 years later, I had folks coming to me and said, we thought you were crazy. But you know what? The company did just fine without me for the 2 weeks that I wasn't there. So,
that is a good concept here, of course, in America and the United States, they're not going to go for it. You got to be there at least a year, before you take a vacation. But when you talk about burnout and you talk about how it affects the organization or the company, if you're a leader and you burn out, take a vacation.
Do you, if you've ever been on a plane, which I'm sure you have, when they give the safety instructions, they tell you, put if you need the oxygen mask, put it on your face first before you put it on somebody else's. So this is the same concept, for burnout. I understand, I think very well that the organizational environment can be extremely stressful, but I would encourage everyone to really look at how much of that stress is self-inflicted. And I'm happy to share another story about that. I had someone working for me who at some point, relatively out of the blue, I didn't see it coming. He was complaining that it was so unfair that I expected her to work, from 7 to 7, and then she's answering text messages and phone calls until 10 o'clock at night, and she was really stressed. And so I said to her, it's like, I want to make this very clear. I appreciate all you're doing, but I also want to make sure you realize that I have not asked you for this. I said, if you go home and you answer text messages from your customer base until 10 o'clock at night, they get used to it and they expect it. And now you start feeling the pressure. It's like, tell them you're not answering after 6 p.m. And then for a couple of months at 5 o'clock, I would always go and say, it's 5 o'clock. You need to go home. And so she realized that she was doing some of it seriously to herself, by trying to be super responsive. And we want responsiveness with clients, of course, but I also understand, or I really think that it's a responsibility of the employee as much as it is of the organization to make sure that people have the ability to not, that they're not burning out, that they're not more stressed than they have to be. Sometimes there's always ups and downs, and sometimes there's stressful situations and you can't avoid that. But as a general rule, it should be a busy, work, but it shouldn't be such that people go home on their knees and don't know how to get out of bed the next day.
So, okay, yeah, you are exactly right. They sometimes they bring it on themselves. So here's another text. It says, in working with different organizations, have you seen someone who has leadership capabilities, but they did not believe in themselves to fulfill that role?
Yes, I have seen that. I've seen that a few times. And it takes time to, the person needs to want to do the job. So there's two things, So one is they may not really be convinced they can do it, but they still kind of want it. That's I think a decent starting point, because then it becomes their boss's role, to help them build that confidence, and it becomes a process. And this goes back to, how do people land in jobs when they're not ready?
Yeah.
Very few organizations take the time to expose individuals that they feel have the potential to situations where they can actually try this out and, see if it's for them, build the confidence that they can do it. You could, that if you really want to give that opportunity, you'll find a project they can lead, or you can put them on, on a special assignment where they have to present in front of executives, where you can give them some exposure. And I think, I've seen it a few times. I've had somebody who actually, when I hired her, she, and I hired her actually into a managerial role, and she hadn't had that before, but I saw it. And so, I was able to help her along. And, today she's a vice president somewhere, she's been doing,
Okay.
she's been doing great, but it took some time, it took time of leading her into the situation a little more slowly, letting her do things on her own, helping her reflect on what went well, what didn't go so well, why would she want to change anything, or even asking the question, so why would that make you feel uncomfortable? Do you see the reaction from the other people? They totally responded to what you were saying, how you were saying it. So what is it that's holding you back, or where are you thinking? That requires some coaching and coaxing,
Yeah.
quite frankly. But if they respond, if they jump over as we say in German, jump over their shadow, and do it, then then it can be a great tip. My experience is, if someone has that doubt, they eventually become a much better leader, because they're not really inclined to think they're always right. They're
Oh,
not inclined to say, well, this is because I say so. They have an understanding of questioning themselves sometimes and say, maybe I should think about that. Maybe I should, is there something that I'm missing? And then come to a conclusion to whatever it is that, that they've decided.
okay. So I also read that you worked with horses.
I do have a horse, yes.
Okay. And you mentioned lessons from them. So how has that shaped your view of leadership, presence, or even relationship dynamics? Because I know relationships play a great part in being a leader.
Yeah. So horses are prey animals, and they are herd animals, and
Hmm.
they need a leader. So a horse, if you don't take the lead, they're not going to do what you want them to do. So now, but they also require respect. So if you go in and you just try to whip them into shape, it's not going to work. They're going to react accordingly. And if you have a 1,300-pound animal standing in front of you that's not happy, then that's usually not a good thing. Horses are very communicative, but because they can't talk, but they have other, physical signs. Their ears will tell you. So if my horse is out in the field and I come get him, then he knows I'm coming way before, I'm even close. He knows,
Okay.
he knows this. He's also very, very sensitive to my mood. So when I come to the barn and I'm in a hectic hectic mode and I want to get done, then he will wiggle and, not slow down, and he will put his head on my shoulder and force me to slow down. So,
Really?
and that's what he does. And I mean, he's great. But so he'll put his head on my shoulder and he's just going to force me to slow down and stand there. And then we relax and he takes this deep sigh. It's really funny, until I get my head into the game. And the long story short is, if I'm not there mentally with him, while I handle him on the ground or while I'm on him, he will not function properly.
Wow.
So the point for leadership here is, if you're not listening, if you're not attuned into what your people are doing, how they're acting and behaving, you're going to miss the signs. And if they're not, and they won't do, they don't feel you appreciate them as much, or you're valuing them for not just for what they do, but also for who they are. And then at that point, disengagement sets in. People are disenchanted. It's like, well, this guy doesn't care about me. Why would I walk the extra mile? Right? And the horse is the same, like if you're not really there and you're not giving them what they need, then they're like, well, why do you think I should be doing this? And when they're not, if the horse doesn't want to be moved, you're not moving a horse. It's very simple.
Wow. I have really learned something. I did not know that. Oh wow, that's something. So you have a course called Leadership, a Conscious Choice. Tell us about that course and what it means to approach leadership as a deliberate decision rather than that automatic, like, next step.
Yeah. So I designed this course because I've seen too many people promoted in a role that then they weren't happy, the team weren't happy, everybody kind of fails in this scenario. And it just made me think that there's really, when you think about traditional leadership training, there's nothing that prepares you for leadership in that sense. And so I've designed this course. It's really more than anything, it's reflection. It explains a little bit the three hats that leaders wear, from a coach, a manager, etc. And so it gives you a context of, when you walk into a leadership role, your life will change. And the expectations will be different. And it asks you questions around, are you ready? Are you ready now? Is that something that you really want? And then it'll ask questions about, who can help you with getting there if that's what you want and you feel you're not ready. So I believe it's a very helpful tool for anyone who thinks about leadership. I also believe that it could be helpful for people who have already been in leadership roles for a little while and just don't know quite why it's maybe not working as well as it should be. Because again, it's all about the individual. Think about, what does leadership really mean for me, and is that the right thing for me?
Okay, so what I did on the lower third, I put how people can reach you, and they can reach you on LinkedIn.
For sure.
So I have it on the lower third, and for people who are just audio, you just go to her name on LinkedIn, and it's ULRIKE, Hildebrand, HILDEBRAND. But for those who are watching, of course, you see it on the lower third. And if like not writing it down or really looking hard, you'll always be able to see it on YouTube or the other channels. So for someone who is watching or listening and they're considering a leadership role, what is that one mindset shift or practical tool that they can apply right now, this week?
Well, that's I really think the best thing to do when you think about leadership is reflect for yourself. Do you want that accountability? because ultimately that's what it is. It's accountability for other people, it's accountability for results. And are you willing to step back? I tend to compare this with parenting. When you decide to become a parent, you're no longer the number one. It's always the child first. And when the child messes up, it's you who's going to be called to school, to stand in for whatever mishap happened. So I think the very best thing that anybody can do is truly think about, is that what I want, and am I comfortable doing this? It is the question that, especially when there's the surprise promotion, is not asked, right? So you want to be ready for that question. When that question is asked, most of the time, if people hadn't put their name down, if they were approached because they're the high performer, then they feel obliged to say yes, because it's an honor. It's also something that, it's a title thing, it's money, it's all of that. And all of those are not bad reasons in itself. But I think just like any other decision, think about the consequence, think about what that means for you first, and then think about what that means for everybody else. Because when you come home and you're not happy, your spouse is also not happy. And then that doesn't make any sense for the long haul either.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, okay. It's, another text. What is your biggest challenge in your field?
My biggest challenge in my field is that the mindset of businesses, that people are a cost factor and not an asset.
Oh my goodness.
So, and let me explain this just a little bit. When you sit on the HR side, or when you care about people, and you want them to develop and all this, having been in those roles where I've been, where budget has always been an issue, and when crisis hits, then whatever training and development budget may have been set aside is the first one to go. And then I've encountered bosses that would say, what, people should be grateful that they can work here. And I'm like, well, maybe they should, but also you should be grateful when they show up, because when they don't, you have no business, so it's a codependency. And so this mindset of, and it's really designed also by financial statements, on the P&L, at the bottom line, people are personnel cost. And as cost by definition needs to be reduced, not invested in. And I've always struggled with, specifically when I worked in manufacturing, and people get so excited about some 10,000 ton press and piece of equipment, they look at that thing, and I'm standing there and saying, do you guys realize this machine doesn't do anything if there's nobody here who knows how to turn it on, off, and fix it? So it still is all about people. And that is my biggest challenge, to convert folks into the mindset that, you cannot run your business without people. And so therefore you need to look at your people as assets, and not just say that on their website, but actually mean it. Not just put it on the wall, but actually act like that. Take them seriously. They, listen to them. Give them the communication, the information that they need. Don't assume they just need to show up here, do their work. They're not a piece of equipment. I mean, maybe they should be, because the equipment is an asset, that is being invested in. So that is my biggest pet peeve and my biggest challenge.
Okay, all righty. Well, hopefully you answered that question. So, looking ahead, what gives you the most hope about the future of leadership and talent development?
So the hope I have is, there are plenty of organizations out there that offer a lot of development, that offer, for individuals as well as organizations. There are great concepts out there. There are people out there who actually do think that is important. But my biggest hope is really the next generation, in the sense that they have learned other than my generation, and I'm generalizing here because I'm speaking about me and the people that I know at my age. When we grew up to start working, it was keep your head down, work hard, and good things would happen. We didn't question things. We just tried to get along and go along and make things happen. This next generation here that's that's in the workforce now and that's coming is growing up with a different approach, or in a different mindset. They grow up with the idea that it's okay for them to have an opinion and to voice it. And I think they're even from an economic perspective, in the world that they have grown up in, they haven't necessarily had the need so much to think about work is all about money. It's like
Yeah.
you have to work for a living, and that's if the work happens to be fun, that's a bonus, but that's not the goal. I think that these younger generations are coming up with an idea to also talk about I need to like what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and in some cases the company should be doing something that's useful for society. And I think that has the potential to change, how employees in general are treated in the workforce. Because if someone has the ability and the guts, and the standing to say, look, I don't have to work here if you treat me like an idiot.
Right.
And I will find something else. And they show us, right? You look at resumes from younger people, 2 years here, 2 years there, it's totally fine. My generation, that was that was a death sentence. To me, I'm hopeful for that. I'm also hopeful that with the arrival of AI, we can we can create tools for leadership to actually be better leaders than there are without it. And there's no longer a need to point to HR or wait for HR to do the leadership role, because I can create tools that they can use that can help them do better in having conversations, in looking for signals, in identifying the critical roles, in building organizational structure. So there's a lot. I mean, this technology is amazing.
Yeah.
As long as you keep it, as long as the humans keep the same, right? But
Yeah.
the ability and the capacity and capability that AI has is just, I think it opens up completely new doors on how how the workforce will run. And in future, I believe everybody will be a leader. They may not manage people, they're going to manage AI agents, but
Yeah.
there's managing. So
Yeah. Oh wow. Ulli, time went by so fast.
I know.
It went by so fast. But what I want to do, I want to say this to leaders out there, of organizations. You definitely, her contact information is on the lower third. So you definitely need to reach out to Ulli because she has a wealth of information. And really want to thank you, Ulli, because you've opened up some things for me in my leadership role that I was put in.
Yeah. If I can be of any help, please just reach out. You know where to find me.
But thank you so much for being my guest. I really appreciate it. Before I go, what's your horse's name?
Oh, his name is Buster.
Oh, okay. Well, rub Buster for me.
I will. I shall see him tomorrow.
Okay, great. Well, you have a beautiful, blessed rest of your evening. And thank you again for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. It was fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Okay. So me too. All righty. Well, you know what? Wow. This is great. This is great. And so if you're a leader or you want to be a leader, you really need to contact Ulli. And think of, well, you can get, when you go to her LinkedIn, you can definitely look up her course that with the questions that she asked. So I think that would be great. So let me do my shameless plug before I go. So now there is a book of mine I collaborated on, And this is the name of the book. It's called The Heart Map for Wellness. And I do have a chapter in this book. And my chapter has to do with relationships and wellness. It is available now on Amazon, and it's only 99 cents right now. So you can get it in the Kindle version. And so what I'm going to do is run along the lower third here. Not the lower third. Well, yeah, that is a lower third. That's really big. So I'm going to do it both here, both ways. So I'd appreciate it very much if you all would support me and get my book. And so for Audible only, just you can DM me at relationshipmatters@gmail.com and I can send you the link. So, but I would appreciate it. So this has been amazing. It's been all about leadership. And a lot of us are thrust in those roles sometimes. And since sometimes we ask for those roles. But it's something to think about when you are a leader of small business or a large organization. And I think that for those of you who know leaders of organizations or small businesses or whatever, or in a leadership role, or even thinking about being in a leadership role, and they did not get a chance to watch this live, there's several ways that you can watch this. The easiest way, I tell people, is to go on YouTube and just look for Dr. Janice Fortman. And that's the easiest way, rather than trying to find it on Roku and Amazon and Apple and Fire. The easiest way is to go to my YouTube page. So I will see all of you next week on Relationship Matters TV. I want you to remember there are all kinds of relationships, all kinds of relationship matters. Life is about relationships. So once again, here is Ulli.